So the very first tool we're going to talk about is relationships. So relationships are a relatively new feature that was added to Tableau just a couple versions ago. And they are interesting. They're not featured in other similar platforms or other similar programming languages. And for that reason, they deserve a little bit of explanation because even if you had like a course on SQL or something, you probably haven't seen a relationship, at least the way we're defining it here. So a relationship is a flexible connection between data sheets. By flexible, we mean you have to specify how these things are connected, but they are never formally connected in the background. It's just a logical connection. And for this reason, Tableau makes a distinction between the logical layer, this is where relationships live, and the physical layer. This is where joins and unions live. By physical here, I mean actually there is an object in memory that is the full joined unioned data set. Whereas in the relationship kind of framework, the pieces of the data frame remain separate in memory, and they're only connected logically by links. Tableau then intelligently connects the data set in memory as it needs to in order to make the visualizations you ask for. So the end result here is that relationships are typically computationally more efficient, they're faster, they're easier, you don't have to worry about as many of the details as you would in typical joins and things like this. The downside that I found is that it covers up a lot of stuff. It does what it does really well, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't do everything. And because it doesn't do everything, we still have to learn about unions and joins because a relationship won't cover all of our bases. So where relationships work, great. Where they don't, not so great. So let's just see kind of how that works in Tableau and do some preliminary digging. So we'll go over to Tableau. The file we're going to be looking for here is the Bookshop dataset, and we want the Excel version here. So it's Bookshop, and it's bookshop.xlsx. Okay, so this is the same Bookshop dataset that we've used before, except instead of being unified, and I did that unifying for you, it is now separated out into different sheets. All of these sheets are, you can think of them as completely separate data files. That's totally fine. In Excel, obviously, they're different sheets, but we could have gotten, for instance, the author data set from our publisher, the sales data set from our sales team, the awards from the award committee, whatever. These could have been assembled from very disparate places, and we have to figure out how they're linked together. So we're going to call this area here, this area off to the right, our canvas. And this is where we're going to be dragging, or our environment where we're going to be dragging our stuff. And let's start at the top here and kind of work our way over. So at author, we can actually look at the data and notice here that we have an author ID, we have birthday, so on and so on. And so when you're starting to assemble this data model, typically you'll be given a schematic and it will show you all the connections. Sometimes you're the one that has to figure out what the schematic is, and this is one of the cases. So we actually don't know how these things are connected, so we're gonna have to figure it out. So here we have author ID, that sounds good. So let's drag this in, and then let's take a look at, I don't know, do you wanna take a look at award and see what we see? So I don't see anything matching between these. I don't see any fields that are matching between these two. Like I have award name and title and year one. So let's just, let's leave this one for now. But if I look at book, for instance, here I see author ID and author ID in both of these data frames. So what I'm going to do is tell Tableau that when you see author ID AM392 over here in the book data frame, that is the same author ID AM329 over in the author data frame. I'm going to make a relationship between these two columns. Relationships can have to do with just one column, that's okay. It can have to do with multiple columns, and we'll talk about that when the time comes. So I'm going to drag this out here. Notice that I get this orange noodle, and noodle is the technical term. This is actually what Tableau calls it. This orange noodle is the visual depiction of a relationship between the two fields. And so we're going to just drop this thing here. Tableau will do its best to identify identical fields in the two data frames. If you can't do that, you can say add more fields, and you can actually specify it. Like for instance, if it was called author ID over here and auth ID over here, then you can specify that connection. Notice that even here they're slightly different. There's a space in this one and there's not a space in this one, but Tableau has kind of flexed with that difference. So this relationship is now coded between these two data frames, and so we can use the fields together as if there was kind of one big data frame, even though that's not actually what's happening in memory. So what else do we want to do? Let's look at award now. All right, so maybe now, did I do author again? Maybe now we can actually bring in author. And what would I do it by? I think I would do it by title, but let me just make sure. In fact, let's just try it. So I'm going to drag this in, and maybe Tableau will figure it out. Yep, title in both fields. We're good to go there. What else can we do? Let's do checkouts. And let's look at checkouts real quick. So checkouts is by book ID. And if I had to guess, book ID is going to be in book, and it is. So I need to drag this one to here. Looks good. Edition. How about this? Book ID again. So this is going to be a property of the book. Good. Let's skip info for now. Publisher. Now, publisher is an interesting one. Where do we want to go here? So we've got pub ID, and I don't remember seeing that one. So I have to kind of look back through here. Okay. Where should pub ID go? I don't see it. So let's see. In fact, let's just try and see what happens if it doesn't work. See what I mean? Like it just doesn't work here. It says I can't find any connection between these two. So where would this go then? So let's look around. I mean, again, sometimes this is a little bit of a detective work to see what's going on. And if I look at edition here, I can actually see the pub ID. And so let's drag publisher so that it matches with edition. Okay, good to go. And what are we at? Ratings. Ratings is by book ID. Good. So that one will go here. And we're going to skip sales and series for now. We'll come back to those. We'll come back to those in a moment. But this is what we're talking about when we talk about a data model composed of relationships. Tableau handled the relationships between each one of these data frames and its pair completely flexibly. For the most part, it was completely automatic. We kind of had to do a little bit of a detective work to figure out what fields were shared between different sheets. For the most part, in the real world, for the most part, that will be done for you. But oftentimes, there's plenty of times where it's not, where you have to, for instance, I was working with COVID data, and over here you have information related to census tracts, and over here you have data related to counties for presidential election or something, and you're the one that kind of has to knit these things together from these disparate sources. So it can go both ways. Now, we've left some things out, in particular sales we've left out info, and we've left out series. The reason we've left these out are not because we're not going to integrate them, it's because we need specialized tools to do them. And in fact, if we look at info here, we have book ID split up across two pieces, the letter part and the number part. Turns out relationships will not handle that. These sales are broken up across 4 data sheets, but we probably want them in one. Relationships won't handle that, and so on and so on and so on. So my point with all of this is that relationships often get us 90% of the way there, but we really do need to get 100% of the way there. So we're going to have to introduce some additional concepts, namely unions and joins, in order to close that gap. But we'll save that for a future video.